These books, they don't comfort, they confront. They dig into the parts of human nature we'd rather not acknowledge. And once you've seen what they reveal, you can't unsee it. The third one especially, it unsettled me in a way that still lingers. So yeah, stay with me until the end. Because after this, you might not see people the same way again. Not every book exists to entertain. Not every book exists to give you a cozy night and a tidy ending. Some are mirrors. The kind you didn't ask for. The kind that show you shadows you'd prefer stayed hidden. And yet, those are the books I remember the most. Not the cheerful ones. Not the ones with happy resolutions. But the ones that left me staring at the ceiling at night, asking, wait, is that true about me too? The three books we're diving into today are not TikTok trends. They're not current bestsellers with bright covers on the front table. They're old, dusty, sometimes forgotten. But don't confuse forgotten with harmless. They weren't forgotten because they were boring. They were forgotten because they were dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of violence, but dangerous because they strip away illusions. And illusions? Illusions are what most of us rely on to stay sane. So today, let's walk into uncomfortable territory. Let's pull three books back into the light. Books that reveal dark truths about human nature. Truths that, once you sit with them, might change how you see yourself and the crowd around you. Ready? Let's go. Book number 1, The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, 1895. Part 1. Picture Europe in the late 1800s. The smoke of factories filling the air. The noise of machinery echoing through streets. People flooding into cities, pressed shoulder to shoulder in crowded housing blocks. Waiting in line at factories. Marching in strikes. Waving banners in protest. This was a world in transition. The old ways of rural life, with its steady rhythms and predictable hierarchies, were crumbling. Industrialization created something new, the mass. Crowds of workers demanding rights. Crowds of citizens filling squares. Crowds of soldiers marching through capitals. And Gustave Le Bon, doctor, anthropologist, social psychologist before the term really existed, stood at the edge of these crowds, watching, studying, uneasy. His central question was simple but terrifying. Why do people act differently in groups than they do alone? And his answer? It was blunt, almost cruel. Le Bon argued that rational, thoughtful, responsible individuals, people who, in isolation, might behave with decency and restraint, become something else entirely when they merge into a crowd. He wrote, "The crowd is always intellectually inferior to the isolated individual." What did he mean? In his view, when you enter a crowd, you don't just join it, you dissolve into it. You stop thinking clearly. You stop reasoning. Instead, you start feeling. Logic dissolves into raw emotion. Skepticism collapses into blind belief. Morality is not erased, but replaced by momentum, by the contagious energy of the group. And here's the part that still makes me uneasy. Le Bon said crowds don't merely influence people, they transform them. The mild clerk becomes a rioter. The quiet neighbor becomes a fanatic. The rational mind dissolves into what he called the collective unconscious. Sound familiar? When Le Bon was writing, he was looking at mobs storming parliaments, angry workers filling squares, rallies that turned men into soldiers and slogans into revolutions. But reading him today, it feels almost prophetic. Because now, it's not just physical crowds, it's digital ones. Think about it. Social media as the new public square, Twitter storms, viral outrage, cancel culture. How many times have you watched thousands of people pile onto someone they've never met? Someone they'll never meet? Do you really think each of those people sat down, reflected, weighed the morality of their action, thought deeply before joining? Or were they swept along? Laban would say they were never truly thinking as individuals. They were being carried by the current. And I'll be honest, reading the crowd today made me quieter. It made me look at myself with suspicion. It made me wonder, how many of my beliefs are actually mine? And how many were absorbed unconsciously from the noise around me? That's a disturbing thought. That even the inner monologue in my head, the words I think are mine, might be echoes of a crowd I once stood in. And that realization alone, that my very sense of self might not be fully mine, that's enough to make this book unforgettable. But we're only scratching the surface. Because Laban didn't just stop at describing the effect. He broke down the mechanisms, how leaders manipulate crowds, how symbols and images override reason, how crowds can be both destructive mobs and, paradoxically, the engines of revolutions. In the next section, we'll look closer at exactly how the crowd works according to Laban, what he thought made us so vulnerable, why intelligence crumbles in groups, and how emotions spread like wildfire. And fair warning, some of what he wrote over a century ago feels uncomfortably close to our world today. Part 2. The Anatomy of a Crowd. So, what actually happens when you enter a crowd? What changes inside you? Laban believed that something almost chemical occurs, an alchemy of anonymity, emotion, and suggestion. The individual doesn't just join the crowd, they're absorbed into it. He called it a kind of mental contagion. Ideas and feelings pass from person to person like sparks until the entire group is blazing with a single mood. One angry shout becomes a riot. One rumor becomes a panic. One slogan becomes a movement. And suddenly, the crowd is not a collection of individuals anymore. It is one body, one mind. There are 3 key ingredients in this transformation, according to Laban. First, anonymity. Second, contagion. Third, suggestibility. So, what is anonymity? In a crowd, the individual feels hidden. Responsibility is diffused. You're less likely to feel accountable for your actions because you're just one face among many. It's the same reason someone might scream insults from a car window or post cruelty online under a fake username, because they believe they won't be singled out. In the crowd, the mask of individuality slips away, and with it, restraint. Let's talk about contagion. Laban compared it to hypnosis. Emotions spread faster than arguments. Fear, anger, excitement, they ripple across a group before anyone has time to stop and think. Rational objections are drowned out by the swell of feeling. That's why you can see thousands chanting in unison, even when many don't fully understand what they're chanting for. The crowd pulls them along. Now comes suggestibility. This is the scariest part. Once caught in the current, people become highly suggestible. A charismatic leader can plant an idea, a phrase, a symbol, an image, and the crowd will seize it, repeat it, defend it as if it were their own thought. But in reality, it's borrowed, implanted. And here's where it gets darker. Laban said that once these forces take hold, the intelligence of the individual is not just reduced, it's erased. Crowds, he argued, are incapable of critical thinking. They crave simplicity. They want absolutes, not nuance. Symbols, not arguments. Passion, not logic. That's why leaders of crowds rarely bother with reasoned debate. They don't need to. They only need to repeat, exaggerate, simplify. Make it vivid, Laban advised. Make it emotional. Because once the crowd feels it, they will believe it. He gave examples. Revolutions ignited by slogans rather than detailed plans. Religious movements built on symbols rather than theology. Political uprisings stirred by a few words shouted from the steps of a parliament. And while he wrote in the 1890s, you can feel the resonance today. Think about hashtags trending on Twitter, memes spreading across platforms, images of protests going viral before anyone explains the details. The mechanism is the same. Simplicity, emotion, contagion. Now, you might think, if crowds are so intellectually inferior, why do they exist at all? Why do we join them? If the result is so destructive, wouldn't we resist? Laban had a bleak answer. He said crowds are not just destructive, they are seductive. They provide a sense of power, of belonging, of purpose. Alone, you are small. In a crowd, you are immense. Alone, your voice is a whisper. In a crowd, it's a roar. And there's something intoxicating about that roar. Think about times you've been swept up at a concert, a protest, a stadium, or even online, when thousands of people rally behind a hashtag, a phrase, a cause. For a moment, you feel part of something bigger. You feel fused into a larger body. It can be thrilling. It can even feel righteous. But Laban would warn, it is also dangerous. Because in that fusion, your individuality, your skepticism, your morality can slip away. He compared it to regression. That in a crowd, people don't become more enlightened, they revert to a more primitive state. Instinct over reason. Emotion over reflection. The individual intellect, which took a lifetime to build, collapses in seconds when submerged in the collective. Reading this, I found myself unsettled, because it explained things I've seen but never fully understood. The sudden aggression of a mob, the irrational joy of a chant repeated until it's nonsense, the way people defend a slogan more fiercely than an idea. And I realized Laban wasn't just writing about mobs in the streets. He was writing about something deeper, the fragility of reason in the face of belonging. That fragility is still with us, and maybe it always will be. Part 3. Leaders, Symbols, and the Power of Illusion. If crowds are unstable, emotional, and irrational, then how do they ever organize? Why don't they just scatter into chaos? Laban's answer is simple. Crowds need leaders. And not leaders in the rational, reasoned sense. He wasn't talking about careful thinkers or great debaters. He meant figures who embody an idea, a passion, a direction. Leaders who are less about thought and more about presence. He wrote that, "The leader serves as the hypnotizer of the crowd." Think about that. Hypnotizer. The leader doesn't persuade so much as mesmerize. And what's the key tool of this hypnosis? Not logic, not evidence, but illusion. Laban said, crowds hunger for simple images, vivid symbols, and absolute promises. They don't want nuance. They don't want, on the one hand, on the other hand. They want clarity, boldness, certainty. That's why slogans work. That's why flags rally armies. That's why a single photograph can fuel an entire movement. The leader gives the crowd a story, an image, an illusion, and the crowd clings to it, repeats it, defends it with their lives. And here's the chilling part. Once a leader has this hold, they don't need to justify themselves. The crowd doesn't demand it. In fact, they resist it. They prefer myth over fact, reassuring illusions over unsettling truths. Le Bon observed this in revolutions, where charismatic figures rallied masses with impossible promises. He saw it in religion, where symbols and rituals stirred devotion more powerfully than doctrine. And he predicted it in politics, where demagogues would rise not by reason, but by spectacle. Does that sound familiar? Look around. Think of modern rallies where a chant can drown out policy. Think of social media, where an image or meme can ignite outrage faster than a 10-page essay ever could. Think of how quickly illusions spread and how fiercely they're defended, even against evidence. Le Bon would say, "This is not new. It is the old machinery of the crowd, dressed in new clothes." But it's not just symbols, it's also repetition. Le Bon emphasized that repetition is the hammer that engraves ideas into the crowd's mind. Say something once, it's ignored. Say it 100 times, it becomes truth. Say it 1,000, it becomes sacred. That's why propaganda relies on rhythm, why slogans are short, why chants are simple. The crowd doesn't analyze, it absorbs. And honestly, this unsettled me, because it forced me to admit that even I'm not immune. None of us are. Hear an idea repeated enough, through headlines, tweets, conversations, and it starts to feel familiar. And familiarity often feels like truth. It's not that we believe because we've reasoned it out. We believe because we've heard it enough times to stop questioning. Le Bon's conclusion here is stark. In the hands of a skillful leader, a crowd can be made to believe, to obey, to act, against its own reason, even against its own interests. And the scariest part? The crowd will often feel liberated by this, empowered. They think they're acting freely. But in reality, they're being carried by the wave. This is why Le Bon warned that crowds can be both revolutionary and destructive, noble and savage, creative and cruel. It all depends on the leader and the illusions they project. When I read this part of the crowd, I couldn't help but think of modern politics, advertising, even fandoms. How often do we defend an idea not because we reasoned it out, but because someone we trusted, someone who symbolized something larger, gave it to us? And if that's true, then maybe the real danger of crowds isn't just what they destroy. It's how easily they can be steered, and how willingly we follow. Part 4. The morality of crowds. Creativity, destruction, and the double-edged sword. Up to this point, Le Bon sounds almost merciless. Crowds are irrational. Crowds are emotional. Crowds are hypnotized. But he didn't stop there. He also admitted something that's harder to swallow. Crowds aren't only destructive. They can also be creative. He wrote that the unconscious action of crowds is often wiser than the deliberate action of individuals. Strange, right? The same mob that can burn down a city can also spark a revolution. Think of it like fire. A fire can destroy a home, but it can also warm one. Crowds work the same way. They can tear apart the fabric of society, or they can weave something entirely new. Le Bon gave examples: the French Revolution, the rise of Christianity, the sweeping waves of nationalism in 19th century Europe. Each of these began as a crowd, chaotic, impulsive, emotional. But out of that chaos, something enduring was born. And that's the paradox. Individually, a person might hesitate, second guess, shrink back. But in a crowd, hesitation vanishes. The crowd leaps. And sometimes, that leap changes history. This doesn't mean the leap is always good. The French Revolution gave us both the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the guillotine. Religious movements gave us charity and community, but also wars and inquisitions. The same crowd that liberates can also enslave. The same crowd that builds can also destroy. Le Bon called this the morality of crowds. But morality here doesn't mean what you think. It's not about good versus evil. It's about intensity, absolutes, simplicity. Crowds don't do nuance. They don't debate shades of gray. They swing wildly, from devotion to hatred, from sacrifice to cruelty. One moment a crowd will die for an idea, the next, it will kill for it. And because of this volatility, Le Bon believed crowds were always dangerous, even when they appeared noble. Because nobility in a crowd can flip, in an instant, into savagery. Reading this, I found myself uneasy, because it means that even the crowds we cheer for, the marches for justice, the movements for freedom, are not immune. Their passion can still slip into fanaticism. Their fire can still consume more than it saves.
Le Bon also pointed out something else. Crowds are rarely innovators. They don't invent. They don't analyze. But they can amplify. They can take a small idea, a spark, and turn it into a wildfire. That's why revolutions spread faster than reforms. That's why religions expand further than philosophies. That's why slogans survive longer than essays. The crowd doesn't create the seed, but it waters it, nourishes it, multiplies it, until the world can't ignore it. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling truth of all. The progress of history, the things we take for granted, like nations, rights, even moral codes, may not have been carefully reasoned into being. They may have been shouted into existence by crowds. So, when we ask whether crowds are good or bad, Le Bon would probably laugh. They're neither. They're both. They are the raw, untamed force of human nature. Like the ocean. Beautiful. Terrifying. Impossible to control. And the question isn't whether crowds are moral. The question is whether we as individuals are strong enough to resist being swallowed by them. Because once you're in the wave, you don't get to steer. You only get carried. Part 5. Why the crowd still matters today. Here's the question that matters most. Why read a book from 1895 about mobs in the streets of Paris? Why does the crowd still matter? Because when you strip away the 19th century setting, Le Bon wasn't just describing crowds. He was describing us. Think about it. Today, we live inside digital crowds, Twitter storms, viral outrage, online mobs that can appear and dissolve in hours. The anonymity Le Bon described, that's every burner account. The contagion, that's the algorithm amplifying the loudest voices. The suggestibility, that's influencers, politicians, brands, dropping symbols, images, hashtags. And repetition, you scroll past the same phrase, the same meme, the same slogan, again and again, until it feels familiar. And familiarity, in the mind of the crowd, is truth. It's eerie how prophetic this feels, as if Le Bon saw the architecture of social media long before it was built. But it's not just online. Look at stadiums, concerts, rallies. Look at how people chant in unison, wave in unison, rage in unison. Do you really think every person in that sea of faces is making an independent, rational choice? Or are they swept up? And here's where it gets personal. Because it's easy to point at others and say, they are brainwashed, they are swept up, they are irrational. But what about us? How many of our own beliefs are actually borrowed? How many times have we mistaken the roar of the crowd for the voice of our own conscience? That's the uncomfortable part. The part Laban forces us to face. And here's the other side of it. Crowds don't just strip away our individuality. They offer something tempting: belonging, purpose, energy, a voice louder than we could ever have alone. That's why crowds are so hard to resist. They feel good. They feel powerful. They make us forget, at least for a moment, how small and fragile we are when we stand alone.
And maybe that's why Laban's book still lingers, because it reminds us that being human is not just about reason and independence. It's also about this deep, ancient pull to merge, to belong, to dissolve into something larger than ourselves. So why does the crowd matter? Because every time we click share, every time we chant a slogan, every time we rage in unison with strangers, we are testing Laban's theory again. We are proving him right, or proving him wrong. And honestly, most days, I think he was right. Crowds still strip away reason. Crowds still transform. Crowds still rule more of history and more of our daily lives than we'd like to admit. And that realization is why a dusty book from 1895 can still feel so dangerously alive. So that was The Crowd, a book that showed us what happens when individuals dissolve into something larger, when logic gives way to belonging, when identity is swallowed by the mass. But here's the thing. As unsettling as Laban's theories are, they still feel distant, abstract. So now, let's turn to something far more concrete, far more horrifying. A story not about ideas, but about real people. Because the next book on our journey takes Laban's warnings and drags them into the blood and dirt of history. It asks, what happens when ordinary men, people like you and me, stop thinking for themselves and start obeying the momentum of a crowd, an order, a system? The answer is almost unbearable. And yet, we need to face it. Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men tells the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101. About 500 men, middle-aged, working class. Not soldiers, not trained killers, just shopkeepers, truck drivers, family men. And yet, over the course of World War II, these men became executioners. They shot thousands of Jewish men, women, and children. Not from a distance, not in gas chambers, but face to face. And the question that echoes through every page of Browning's book is painfully simple. How? How does an ordinary man, someone who kissed his children goodbye in the morning, someone who worked an honest job, become part of genocide? What happens, step by step, inside a person to make that shift possible? Browning's answer isn't sensational. It isn't easy. It's slow, incremental, ordinary. That's what makes it terrifying. He shows how the men of Battalion 101 weren't monsters at the start. In fact, when they were first ordered to round up and shoot Jewish civilians, many hesitated. Some cried. Some begged to be excused. But here's the thing. Almost none of them refused. And once the first shots were fired, the path forward got easier. Roundups turned into guard duty. Guard duty turned into executions. Executions turned into routine. And before long, killing had become a part of their job. Reading Ordinary Men is different from reading Laban. Laban warned us about the psychology of crowds in theory. Browning forces us to watch what it looks like in practice. And the lesson is chilling. Evil doesn't always come roaring in with horns and fire. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in small steps, in the quiet thought, if I don't do it, someone else will. That's the horror of this book. It doesn't show us monsters. It shows us. Part 2.2. Step by step into horror. The first massacre happened in July 1942. The men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 were ordered to round up the Jewish population of a small Polish village. The commander, Major Wilhelm Trapp, gave them the choice. They didn't have to shoot. Anyone who couldn't bear it could step aside. Here's the detail that haunts me. Of nearly 500 men, only a dozen refused. The rest shouldered their rifles, and then they began. At first, many were horrified. Accounts say some wept as they pulled the trigger. Some drank heavily to dull their nerves. Others tried to aim badly, shooting to wound rather than to kill. But still, they obeyed. And as the weeks went on, the horror became routine. One order followed another. One village blurred into the next. What began with hesitation hardened into habit. This is the terrifying insight of ordinary men. Genocide doesn't erupt overnight. It creeps. It builds. It normalizes itself step by step, until the unthinkable becomes just another task on the schedule.
Round people up, guard them, escort them, shoot a few, shoot more, bury the bodies, move on. Until one day, the men weren't hesitating anymore. And Browning makes it clear, these were not fanatics. They weren't ideologues. They weren't hand-picked sadists. They were ordinary, middle-aged men, too old for the front, drafted into police work. And yet, under orders, under pressure, under the weight of conformity, they became killers. It wasn't horns and fire. It wasn't hatred alone. It was obedience. It was fear of standing apart. It was the easy lie. If I don't, someone else will. And that's the part that lingers, because it's not just history. It's a warning. A reminder that morality is fragile, that the line between ordinary and executioner can be thinner than we want to believe. And it makes you ask the question you don't want to ask. What would I have done? Would I have been one of the dozen who stepped aside? Or one of the hundreds who obeyed? That's the horror of this book. Not that it shows us monsters, but that it shows us how easy it is to become one.
Part 2.3. The psychology behind it. When you first read Ordinary Men, it's tempting to think, these were different times, different people. I could never be like that. But psychology has a way of unsettling those easy reassurances. Because decades after Battalion 101 marched into villages with rifles, social scientists tried to test the same question. How far will ordinary people go when told to obey? You probably know the Milgram experiments. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to a stranger every time he got an answer wrong. The shocks weren't real, of course, but the participants didn't know that. And here's what happened. Most people obeyed, even when the stranger screamed, even when he begged for mercy, even when he went silent, as if unconscious. Why? Because a man in a lab coat said, "The experiment requires that you continue." Think about that. No guns, no threats, just authority. And still, ordinary people pushed the dial, again and again. Now compare that to Battalion 101. No lab coats, but uniforms. No fake shocks, but real bullets. And an authority structure that whispered the same message. The system requires that you continue. Browning shows how the same psychological forces were at play. Obedience to authority. When a commander gave the order, it carried weight. Not just as a suggestion, but as a duty. Conformity to peers. When everyone around you is complying, refusing feels like betrayal. It marks you as weak, disloyal, even cowardly. Gradual escalation. No one went from shopkeeper to executioner overnight. It was step by step,
task by task, each one small enough to rationalize, until the final result was unimaginable. And perhaps the most haunting force of all, the fear of standing alone. One of Browning's most chilling insights is that refusal was possible. Those dozen men who stepped aside on that first day, they weren't punished. They weren't executed. They weren't even court-martialed. They were just excused, which means the rest of the men could have refused too. They just didn't, because standing apart felt harder than pulling the trigger. And if that doesn't disturb you, it should. Reading this, I couldn't stop thinking about how fragile morality is. We like to imagine it as a strong wall, protecting us from evil. But Browning shows it's more like glass. It looks solid until enough pressure builds and it cracks. And once it cracks, ordinary men do extraordinary harm. Part 2.4. Why this still matters. It's easy to tuck stories like this away in history, to say, that was then. That was them, not us. But Browning doesn't let us off the hook, because his book isn't just about 500 German policemen. It's about what happens when ordinary people, in any time or place, are pushed by authority, conformity, and fear. And that makes Ordinary Men less a history book and more a mirror. Think about it. The men of Battalion 101 didn't grow up dreaming of genocide.
They were clerks, salesmen, fathers, people who laughed at dinner tables, kissed their children goodnight, worried about bills. But under the right conditions, war, authority, peer pressure, they slid, one step at a time, until the unthinkable became normal. And that's the part that still matters, because the conditions that shape them, obedience, conformity, fear, are not gone. They're part of us. Look at the 20th century. From Rwanda to Bosnia to Cambodia, the pattern repeats. Ordinary people, not born killers, swept into extraordinary violence, not because they were uniquely evil, but because they were human. And look closer to home. Think about online mobs, about how quickly thousands of strangers can pile onto one person, destroying reputations, careers, lives. Most of the participants don't stop to think. They don't see themselves as cruel. They just go along. It's not the same as genocide, but the psychology is frighteningly familiar. That's why Browning's book lingers, because it forces us to admit that the line between good and evil isn't between us and them. It runs straight through us, through ordinary people, through ordinary choices. And that means the real danger isn't monsters. It's systems, situations, and pressures that can turn neighbors into executioners. The question Browning leaves us with is not, were those men guilty? Of course they were. The question is, what would I have done? And perhaps more urgently, what will I do the next time conformity, obedience, or fear tries to carry me along? Because history doesn't just warn us, it tests us, and the test is never over. Book number 3, The Human Animal by Lionel Tiger. So far, we've looked at two different kinds of darkness. Le Bon showed us how crowds strip away individuality. Browning showed us how obedience and conformity can turn ordinary people into killers. Both of these books confront us with external forces, mobs, orders, systems that reshape who we are. But what if the darkness isn't only out there? What if it's built into us, woven into our biology, our instincts, our ancient wiring? That's where Lionel Tiger takes us. And yes, that really is his name. In 1990, he published The Human Animal, and his claim was bold, that beneath our technology, our culture, our sophistication, we're still animals. Tribal, territorial, hierarchical. Civilization, he argued, is just instinct dressed in a suit. It's a provocative idea, and if you let it sink in, it becomes deeply unsettling.
because it suggests that so much of what we think of as choices, values, or even free will might just be old survival strategies replaying themselves again and again in modern life. And that's where we'll begin, with the provocative premise of Tiger's book, Biology in a Suit. Part 3.1, The Provocative Premise. Lionel Tiger didn't waste time. He came out swinging with a claim that sounds almost insulting to our sense of dignity.
He said, "For all our skyscrapers and symphonies, we are still animals. Biology first, culture second." It's a jarring idea, because we like to think of ourselves as more than that, as rational beings who have left behind the crude instincts of the wild. But Tiger's book is a long, unsettling reminder that maybe we haven't left them behind at all. Maybe we've just hidden them under layers of etiquette, law, and technology. What he calls biology in a suit. Think about it. Why do we form cliques in high school? Why do we compete for status at work? Why do we feel loyalty to a sports team, a nation, a flag? Tiger argues these aren't just cultural quirks. They're echoes of something much older, tribal instincts, hardwired for survival. He wrote that human beings are inescapably social animals, not because we chose to be, but because our ancestors who bonded, who formed groups, survived. Those who didn't make it into the gene pool. And so here we are, still tribal, still territorial, still wired to follow leaders, to mark hierarchies, to protect our in-group and distrust outsiders. The unsettling part? These instincts don't disappear just because we build cities or invent iPhones. They sneak into everything. Politics, religion, office gossip, even fashion. Tiger says, scratch the surface of culture, and underneath, you'll find the same old animal drives: status, territory, reproduction, survival. When I first read this, I wanted to resist it. It feels demeaning. It feels like it strips away the poetry of being human. But then I thought about how quickly people split into tribes online, how fast competition creeps into friendships, how instinctive it feels to defend our group and attack theirs. And suddenly, Tiger's claim didn't feel abstract. It felt obvious. Maybe too obvious. So that's the premise. Not that we're like animals, but that we are animals. Dressed in the trappings of civilization, yes, but driven still by ancient forces. And once you start looking at the world that way, it becomes very, very difficult to unsee. Part 3.2, The Uncomfortable Examples. So what does biology in a suit actually look like? Lionel Tiger fills his book with examples, some fascinating, some disturbing, all uncomfortably close to home. Gender roles. One of Tiger's most controversial claims was that male and female behavior, though shaped by culture, still carries deep evolutionary echoes. He argued that many of the patterns we see in relationships, in parenting, even in workplace dynamics, can't be explained by culture alone. The drive for status, the rituals of courtship, the bonds between mothers and children. He traced them back to survival strategies etched into us long before history began. Whether you agree or not, the unsettling part is this. If he's even partly right, then a lot of what we call choice may actually be instinct wearing a disguise. Power and hierarchy. Tiger points out how every group, no matter how modern, eventually arranges itself into ranks. At the office, in classrooms, in politics, even within friend groups, there's almost always a subtle pecking order. It's not written down, it's not voted on, but it's felt. And he suggests this isn't just culture, it's biology replaying itself. The same territorial and dominance behaviors you see in primates echo in us, in quieter, more polished forms.
Fashion and signaling. Here's one of his more provocative ideas. Even the way we dress can be linked to ancient instincts. Why do people flaunt brands? Why do uniforms command respect? Why does a simple change of clothing alter how others treat us? Tiger argues these are tribal signals, modern plumage like a peacock's feathers, a way of saying, this is my status, this is my tribe, this is my role. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. From high school cliques to luxury brands to military uniforms, it's the same instinct playing dress-up, the in-group and the outsider. Perhaps Tiger's most unsettling point is how quickly we draw invisible lines, us versus them. It doesn't take much, a jersey, a language, an accent, and suddenly one group feels loyalty to each other and suspicion toward the outsider. Tiger saw this not as a failure of culture, but as a survival reflex. Groups that stuck together lasted. Groups that didn't. And so here we are, still drawing lines, sometimes harmless, sometimes deadly. What struck me reading these examples wasn't just how plausible they were, it was how ordinary. Tiger wasn't pointing at extreme situations. He was pointing at the everyday. The way we dress, the way we gossip, the way we split into groups. All of it, he argued, is animal instinct wearing human clothes. And that's why the book lingers. Because once you let that thought in, even something as simple as a business meeting or a school cafeteria starts to look less civilized and more primal. Part 3.3, The Pushback. Not everyone agreed with Lionel Tiger. In fact, many critics pushed back hard. And honestly, that's part of what makes this book so fascinating. Because if Tiger is right, it means biology pulls more strings in our lives than we want to admit. But if he's wrong, or even partly wrong, then reducing everything to instinct is just another illusion. The main criticism? Reductionism. Critics argued that Tiger boiled too much of human behavior down to biology. Yes, we're animals. Yes, instincts matter. But we're also cultural beings. History, values, education, and conscious choice shape us too. To say a business suit is just plumage, or that politics is just tribal dominance, risks flattening all the complexity of human experience into something too simple. Another criticism was that Tiger sometimes treated gender roles as if they were biologically fixed. Skeptics pointed out that what looks like instinct could just as easily be social conditioning. After all, cultures vary enormously in how they handle family, power, gender, and hierarchy. If biology was destiny, wouldn't human societies look more uniform? And there's a fair point here, because sometimes biology explains everything can be a lazy escape hatch. It risks excusing harmful systems as natural when in reality they're cultural and changeable. But here's the twist. Even many of Tiger's critics admitted that he wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe he overstated his case. Maybe he framed culture as weaker than it really is. But the underlying observation that primal instincts still echo in modern life was hard to dismiss.
So perhaps the truth lies in the tension. We are both biological and cultural, both instinctive and rational, both tribal and capable of transcending tribe. Tiger leaned hard toward biology, maybe too hard. But sometimes it takes an extreme position to force us to see the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. And that's why the pushback doesn't weaken the book, it strengthens it. Because it leaves us in a place of ambiguity, not certain whether the suit controls the animal or the animal controls the suit. Part 3.4, Why It Lingers. When I finished The Human Animal, I didn't slam the book shut. I just sat there, thinking. Because Tiger doesn't just give you theories. He plants a question in your head, one that's hard to shake. Am I really choosing this? Or is something ancient choosing it for me? That's the lingering weight of the book. Not that it proves biology explains everything, but that it makes you wonder how much of yourself is really yours. The job you chase,
the people you compete with, the loyalty you feel to your side, the suspicion you feel toward outsiders. Are these conscious choices? Or are they echoes, instincts rehearsed by thousands of generations before you were born? And once that thought is in your head, everyday life looks different. The office feels like a dominance display. Politics feels like a tribal fight. Even friendships feel like the quiet negotiation of status and belonging. But here's the part that unsettles me most. Tiger wasn't saying instincts are bad. He wasn't saying culture is an illusion. He was saying they're tangled. That civilization is not the opposite of biology. It's built on top of it. And sometimes, when the mask slips, the animal underneath is clearer than we want to admit. So why does this book linger? Because once you've read it, you can't look at yourself or the people around you the same way again. It doesn't comfort, it confronts. And in doing so, it makes you aware, maybe too aware, of the thin line between the human and the animal.
3 forgotten books, 1 dark mirror. So, what ties these 3 books together? Le Bon showed us how crowds dissolve individuality. Browning showed us how obedience and conformity can turn neighbors into executioners. Tiger showed us how even beneath our polished surfaces, we're still animals, tribal, instinctive, territorial. Each book comes from a different angle. One is theory, one is history, one is anthropology. But together, they whisper the same unsettling truth. Being human is fragile. We like to think we're rational, that our choices are deliberate, that our morality is solid. But these books suggest otherwise, that in the right conditions, or maybe the wrong ones, reason cracks. Morality bends. Instinct takes over. And ordinary people, people like us, become something else. But here's the paradox. As dark as these books are, maybe they're not meant to destroy hope. Maybe they're meant to sharpen it. Because once you've seen how fragile we are, you also see how precious our better choices become. To pause before joining the crowd, to question authority, even when it costs, to recognize our instincts without being ruled by them. These aren't easy tasks, but they're the difference between repeating history and learning from it. And maybe that's the true value of these forgotten books. Not that they comfort, not that they give easy answers, but that they make us vigilant, that they remind us how easily illusions can swallow us whole, and how much effort it takes to stay awake. Because in the end, the darkest truths about human nature aren't hidden. They're right here, in our history, in our psychology, in our biology. The real question is whether we'll dare to look at them, and what we'll choose to do once we have.